Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com. Now, if you've been watching these videos, you'll know that I've been a little rough on Maestro Claudio Abbado recently because of the Deutsche Grammophone's release of two giant Abbado cubes, his Berlin legacy and his Vienna legacy, both of which have been, well, how shall we say, patchy. Like 50-50, sort of average, some really good stuff and a lot of really not interesting stuff. So I'm very, very happy to be able to give the boy a break and praise this delightful little 8 CD set of Abbado's Chicago recordings. Now, I don't mean to be condescending because most of this is really extremely good. And of course, Abbado was a major, major, major conductor in his day, although I think far more major than he deserved to be. But I want to tell you what's in this set. It's a bunch of his Chicago Symphony recordings, and truth is there isn't really a bad performance in it. And so let's go through the repertoire and see what's here and see what we make of it together, shall we? First, the famous Bartok piano concertos numbers 1 and 2 with Maurizio Pollini. Very good. It really was. It was always great. It had some questions asked about the acoustic balance of piano and orchestra, but I always thought it sounded fantastic. The performances are brilliant, and it's just exciting and wonderful. And it was, one of Abbado's early recordings in Chicago, and Pollini was at his prime, and there's nothing not to like, is there? Next, the Berlioz Symphony Fantastique. Well, here we run into a problem that seems to have plagued some of these recordings, and that is sub-fusc engineering. This was an early digital recording, and I remember how excited I was when it came out because it's like, hey, Chicago Symphony Fantastique, it's going to be a powerhouse recording, and in some ways it is. I don't have anything to criticize in Abbado's interpretation. It is, as always with Abbado, a little bit fussy here and there, perhaps in the finale, the slow movement may be a little slow, but the sound just isn't great. Especially it's lacking in bass, and I don't know what they did. It was early digital, like I said, and it took them quite some time to get it right. And this was one of those performances where I just don't think that they did. But the performance itself is a very, very good one. It's exciting and sensitive and sympathetic. And Berlioz was also a neurotic micromanager, and so he found in Abbado a fairly congenial conductor, although not one to be frenetic in the Charles Munch, way. But it's a very good performance. Next, the Mendelssohn and Bruch violin concertos with Shlomo Mintz. All right. We have lots of versions of these works. Shlomo Mintz sort of dropped out of the face of the earth after a while, and his Digi contract expired. I understand he's quite an estimable teacher now, and is doing just fine. And these performances are absolutely lovely. They're just lovely. I mean, I can't. Again, what am I going to criticize about? The Mendelssohn sounds like the Mendelssohn. The Bruch sounds like the Bruch. Mintz has more than mastered them, and they're lovely. So, good work, everybody. Then, now here comes the meat and potatoes, as they say in the biz. Mahler 1, 2, and 5. Well, as you know, the Mahler 5 made my short list of great Mahler 5s. So I have no problem with Mahler 5. The Mahler 1 was another one of those recordings that had a sonic issue. It was there was this intangible, exaggerated dynamic range, and like you couldn't hear the opening harmonic at the beginning of the first movement, and the strings were just diffuse, and I don't know, because it really wasn't a bad performance. It really wasn't, but it was too loud and too soft. You know what I mean? It had nothing in the middle. A lot like what they did with his digital Ravel, Daphnis, and Chloe with the LSO. It was not Abbado's fault. I think he wanted a wide dynamic range, but I don't think he wanted something where the pianissimos disappear entirely, And it's an exciting performance, but I think his Berlin remake was better between the two of us. That's one place where the Berlin Philharmonic was certainly superior. Now, the second symphony, I always enjoyed this performance. I always enjoyed this performance for its sharpness and discipline. It's very, very exciting. There are moments, however, it's a performance where Abbado, he just misses all of the mystery of the piece. It's totally clear-sighted. Everything is matter of fact. It's incredibly well played, but you hear him fussing, especially with percussion parts. And where, for example, in the ruta, the bundle of sticks that goes on chuk chuk, in the third movement, you barely notice it's there. There's no quiet tam-tam anywhere, which Mahler uses these instruments for a purpose because they have so much atmosphere. They really add something to the piece, and you're supposed to be able to hear it. But Abbado is always, it has that exaggerated pianissimo dynamic range. But the big moments are wonderful. And I just think that if you want what you might call the music's spiritual qualities, or at least more atmosphere, just that sense of mystery and of cosmic outpouring, you're not going to find it here. But it's exciting as hell, and it's certainly the best Mahler 2 that Chicago ever did. So, again, I enjoy hearing it. And the soloists, you've got Marilyn Horne, right? And Carol Neblett. So, again, it's a fine performance. It's a personal performance. It's Abbado's vision, and he gets them to realize it. I have nothing to complain about. I actually just did, didn't I? All right, listen, we always have something to complain about, but they're not major things to complain about. Next, Prokofiev, the Scythian Suite, Lieutenant Kijé. That was such a great record, coupled quite oddly to the Chopin Second Piano Concerto with Ivo Pogorelic. Well, it's Ivo Pogorelic. What are you going to say? I mean, some people like it, some people hate it. You can't fault Abbado. He's just the accompanist, as he is on the final disc, which is the two Prokofiev concertos with Shlomo Mintz. Now, this was always one of the reference recordings of those two works. It's an absolutely beautiful performance. But you have to say, if you look at this, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, roughly 4, or 3.5 really, because of the Chopin, of 8 discs represent Abbado accompanying, which he did very, very well. But you can't really say that those performances display his gifts as a conductor in the way the other things on the program did. I just wish that the engineering had been uniformly superior, because then we would have had a really, really beautiful Abbado set. But there's one even larger question, the elephant in the room, the big, giant beast that's sitting out there. And if you've been watching these videos, you know what that is. It's really simple. They can do a Vienna cube, they can do a Berlin cube, they can do a Chicago Digipack box thing. Where in God's name are Abbado's London recordings? The ones that represent his best work. Where are they? Isn't it demented? And you know what's funny about it? You know what really strikes me as funny about the whole thing? Maybe it's sort of like, poetic justice. Because back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, when the record industry itself was based in London, remember? It was based in London. Universal's head offices were in London. Everything was in London. EMI was in London, right? That's one of the reasons we were deluged with recordings from London, because the people there were British, and it was in Britain, and it was the hometown team. There's no way 30 years ago, 40 years ago, that a major, major legacy that was made in London would not have been packaged for special release by the record label in question. Even if it's Deutsche Grammophon, even if it's the German label, it wouldn't have mattered. That's why Abbado made so many recordings in London. It's fascinating. And it's the same thing, by the way, I think, with the reason EMI, Warner, has not released a Previn LSO box. The labels, the whole industry has gone to pieces. Internationally, it's sort of refragmented. And so the hegemony of the British industrial LP machine is gone. It's gone, at least as far as classical music goes. And, nobody cares. And in a way, there's a certain amount of schadenfreude there, because, it's like, yeah, guys, it's about time. On the other hand, they did some fabulous work. And the fact of the matter is, international, international arrogance and bigotry and chauvinism and nationalism and all those ridiculous things that we've all had to put up with as we go through the classical music world, because it's basically a European phenomenon. And as far as like the culture mavens in Europe go, you would think like the Napoleonic Wars still hadn't taken place. Everybody has these weird nationalistic views of themselves, which I don't understand at all. I used to spend my every year doing the Cannes Classical Awards in Nice, and I always had to I had these international juries, and everything was American this and French that and German this and British that. And I was like, oh Christ, who cares? It was so tiresome. And how should any of that matter when we're talking about musical values, right? I mean, what does the music have to do with it? If Abbado's best work was done in London, then release the stuff he did in London. Period. That's my view. What can I tell you? Anyway, what do I know? I'm just an American provincial. And this, Abbado with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Now, of course, they'll say, oh, well, you like his work with an American orchestra, but what about Berlin and Vienna? Well, I like his work with the London Orchestra best. So there. I don't want to hear any of this chauvinistic nationalist garbage. This is a really nice box. If you don't have these performances, get them. You should have them in your collection. They're quite wonderful for the most part, and you'll have to make some allowances for the engineering. But otherwise, there's nothing not to enjoy. Keep on listening, folks. Thank you.